So appreciate that. If you want to learn a little bit more about the Bible, I encourage you to join us for the Bible study that begins actually this Tuesday. Zoom is at 9 o'clock, and then 10 o'clock you're invited to join us here in the church office, and we'll be in one of the conference rooms. Our series is entitled Secrets of the Bible. If you think you know not the first thing, you're exactly the person we invite to be a part of our Bible study. Trust me, this is something that you will not want to miss if you want to know more about the Bible. So, I'm wondering, I imagine quite a few of you, winding through some of the most beautiful countryside in Northern California is something called simply the wine country. How many of you have visited there? Yeah, almost everybody. So you know what remarkable place it is. Since the mid-19th century, winemaking has been practiced in this region. You might be interested to know that there are over 800 wineries in Sonoma and Napa counties alone. That seems like an awful lot of wineries, but in fact, that's true. As you wind through the countryside, you will see such notable wineries as Kendall Jackson, Sebastiani, Gallo, all kinds of wineries that you have known about. But there are also some, particularly in Napa Valley, that you may never have heard about unless you have visited those little-known wineries such as A Donkey and a Goat. Maybe some of you prefer that winery. Or Ant Hill Farms. Maybe some of you have gone to Black Sheep, Blue Hat, Plump Jack, or my favorite, McKenzie Mueller Winery. There is no association, I'm sorry to say. If you do go to wine country, you can stay in a bed and breakfast, and I'm sure some of you have. You can overlook the vineyards and toast each other with a glass of your favorite grape as the sun sets over the hills. You can take a limo tour of the wineries. You can sign up for a culinary class, which matches your favorite foods with the appropriate wines. If you're up for it, you can tour by bicycle, by train, by bus, or by car, and you can actually learn to swirl without spilling it all over yourself. You can even learn how to be a vintner yourself and make your own special wines. But it all starts with the vineyard, you see. That's where it begins. And that's the foundation of Jesus' story. The owner in this story has leased out his vineyard to some tenants and periodically sends some of his people to collect the rent. Well, one day the owner sends his servants to collect his part of the harvest, to collect the rent. And do you know that those tenants beat those servants, and they actually kill one of them? The owner sends another group of servants to collect the rent. They beat up those servants, and they kill one of those. The owner says, okay, that's it, I'm going to send my son. And so he does. He sends his son thinking they will for sure respect him, and he will collect the rent. But instead, they kill the son. So much for the pleasant wine country tour. This story becomes a tragedy. one that is full of greed and violence and sorrow. As Jesus is telling this story, there are the leaders of the synagogue standing nearby. And they're the target of the story. Jesus is trying to teach them that there is something about the way they are that is very much like these wicked tenants. And it's important that he get this point across. As they hear the account of rebellion and disobedience, they become indignant and they say, those terrible wretches, they ought to die. But that's when Jesus cuts to the chase. Suddenly it dawns on them what this story is about. The owner is God. The vineyard is Israel. The messengers are the prophets of Israel. The Son is Jesus. And the tenant farmers? Those are the leaders of the synagogue who have failed their obligations. The spotlight turns on them, and they begin to get the message. And by implication, the spotlight also shines on us with the same question. Will we give God what is due God? Will we be good stewards? Will we be good tenants of the vineyard? Whether it's Marco Island, whether it's one another, whether it's those who stand in need of a helping hand of ours. Wherever it is. When the early church collected all these stories for the Gospels, they chose to include this one. It was a word of warning to the church then and now to be careful. To be careful lest you forget that you are only tenants. Be careful lest you not listen to the servants of God. Be careful when the owner sends his son that you don't ignore him and crucify him yet again. We forget sometimes, even on this island, that this is God's world and we are only tenants. We're the ones tending the vineyard now, and so we are the ones with responsibilities to share that which God has blessed us with. And we need to make sure that when God walks down Barfield Drive, that we don't miss him. We don't miss him in the message that he brings to us to care for the vineyard, to care for this world, and the people who share it with us. Today is World Communion Sunday, started by the way back in. And today we all drink from the same cup and eat of the same loaf, recognizing all our differences. Remember, 35,000 denominations worth of differences, and yet also recognizing that we are one in God's Spirit. What will you do in recognition of this day? What will you see as your responsibilities for taking care of this world? What's that? You're just one? You can't do much? You're too young, you're too old, you're too rich, you're too poor. You're not talented, you don't know the books of the Bible? Really? Back in way back in the middle of the 1800s, people decided that they were going to build a bridge across Niagara Falls. And the first thing that they noticed was a problem. And the problem was, how were they going to get those steel cables across the large gorge? Well, they had some ideas. They thought they might somehow attach the cable to a cannonball. Well, they thought, well, that's not going to work. And somebody had the bright idea they'd put it to kind of a rocket. That didn't work very well. And somebody came up with the idea, I know what we'll do. We'll use a kite, a little paper kite. And what we'll do is we'll attach a very thin thread onto the kite. And there was a 10-year-old boy who was a master kite flyer. And he agreed to fly that kite over Niagara Falls. Did I mention, he was much better at it than I was. And he flew that kite way over the gorge, and it landed on the other side. And when they captured the kite, then they tied a string on that thread, and they pulled it all the way across. And when they got to that side, they tied a cord, a little heavier cord, and they pulled it all the way back to the other side. When they got there, then they attached a rope, and they pulled it back to the other side. And then a bigger rope. And then they finally attached that steel cable, the first one to cross the gorge. And that's how they built the bridge. But it all started with a very thin piece of thread. Look at all these threads. And you know what? If they had tied that big rope onto the kite, it wouldn't have flown. Nah. Or if they had tied the cable on, well, that wouldn't have worked either, even if they had tried to, maybe the cord, but that might have been too heavy as well. No, they needed a thread, just like you. And that's where it all began. You can be a thread of hope to somebody who's challenged by that wide divide of life and needs you to step up and build a bridge across from your side. Oh, mercy. Come here, RJ. Come here. RJ and I have a deal. And if I use something, I want to make sure that he gets to use it too. Which way are you coming? Coming up here? This is a thread. It's a little piece of thread, just like you. Hold on to that. And take your kite and show it to Mom and Dad and enjoy that this afternoon. Hey, may God bless you. And may God bless United Church of Marco Island and that cat.